Well, good evening. This is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening. And something I'd like to talk about this evening, I came across an article in Zero Hedge, and it was about how much the world had changed in the last decade and become actually unrecognizable. And it kind of caught my eye because I was doing a presentation about a week ago, and that was one of the things that I brought up was, we could go back to 1995 and we could talk about things that would be incomprehensible to someone of that era. Live streaming, the internet, YouTube, emailing, touchscreens, gigabytes, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, this was unheard of back in 1995. And so yes, we have changed very, very, very dramatically in every way that I can think of. Technology, robotics, blockchain, all of this kind of stuff. But one of the great changes, and of course that's what this letter deals with, is the societal changes and some of the ways in which movements have come up, like what would we say, the LGBTQ movement, the rise of social justice warriors, Antifa, etc., and they have become quite a negative force within society. I'm quite actually distressed that this is the way the protest movement is going. And I sorted out some examples here of how basically upside down and backwards this has all become. And so my first example here is, you remember when we were into fat shaming and how fat shaming was a bad thing because it hurt people's feelings and it brought on depression, and there was fashion magazines, fashion shows and so on and so forth devoted to people who were in plus sizes. And now, just a short while later, fat people apparently are the cause of global warming. And so now they're taking the blame. They become a victim of the situation. Greta Thunberg, a very recent example, she is the hero of the environmentalist movement, and why she was needed at this moment is the title of the article here. And of course, Greta Thunberg is now being accused of being too white and a promoter of white supremacy and so on and so forth. And here is an interesting example of how this is on a moving scale. Now you remember, some years back when the whole idea of hate speech came into our lexicon, and this basically meant if you were inciting hatred or violence towards a particular individual or group because of their ideology or the colour of their skin, their race, creed, religious group, whatever. And so in 5 years, this has moved quite a bit, the goalposts have moved, and so now we have a situation in Markham, which is a suburb of Toronto, which has a high Chinese population. Parents went to the school, and I'm assuming that there was an awful lot of Chinese parents. They have a petition with 10,000 signatures, and they were essentially asking the school to take simple precautions that if any of the residents had returned from Wuhan for the Lunar New Year, that they be asked to go into a 17-day self-quarantine, that the students be allowed to wear masks and so on and so forth, and of course, all health protocols be observed. Well, they were accused of being racist and using hate speech simply for making some reasonable requests, which the World Health Organization and other health organizations are basically recommending. That you stay 3 meters away from people to avoid contact with anybody who's traveled recently. This is apparently the beginning of some sort of hate fest, according to Nathan and Sarisco. Situations such as these can regrettably give rise to discrimination based on perceptions, stereotypes and hate. The letter continues, individuals who make assumptions, even with positive intentions of safety about the risk of others, request or demand quarantine can be seen as demonstrating bias and racism. This is insanity, folks. Absolute insanity. So it has become a very upside down world, and that's what I'm concerned about, is that it will all dissolve into just absolute glaring hatred for each other. And so even I, who have a centrist position, find myself in the difficult circumstances of being questioned by both sides because I won't pick a side. because I truly believe that the path forward means picking the right decision, whether that be a left-leaning decision or a right-leaning decision, and that you need to do research before you make a decision, and the best outcome for all should be the goal and not the political ideology that supports it. So, as I said, the problem is, with all of these groups going against each other, I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that they will end up destroying each other or destroying each other's credibility in such a way that makes it very, very difficult to find any kind of cooperative position. And if we're going to resolve any of these problems, we have to have cooperation at every level. And unfortunately, the way this will be resolved at some point in the future is we have to find some common ground. We have to have some common ground rules that we are all going to adhere to, and we can't do that without cooperation from each other. And so it is this anger towards each other, it is this tearing down of history. History is what reminds us of the mistakes that we've made in the past, and that we shouldn't want to make them again in the future. From Zero Hedge, the world became unrecognizable in less than a decade. And this is by Simon Black via sovereignman.com. In the year 1520, exactly 500 years ago, a German scholar named Johann Skoner completed a map of the world that was widely considered to be humanity's most advanced understanding of geography at that time. To us, Schoner's map is pretty amusing. And you can see here that this is North America here, and Brazil, China, Asia, completely out of perspective. There's scarcely any American continent. Instead he drew some amorphous blobs to mark Brazil and the West Indies, and there's a very narrow body of water where the Pacific Ocean is supposed to be, separating Brazil and India. Obviously we know this is totally wrong, but it was science's best understanding of the world in 1520. Then in 1529, a Venetian named Giovanni Ramusio created an updated map based on the various explorations and discoveries through the 1520s. Ramusio's map shows the eastern coastline of North and South America from Newfoundland to the tip of Argentina, and the west coast from Peru through Mexico with incredible precision and accuracy. Even by today's standards, Ramusio's map looks right. You can see the outline of Florida and North Carolina, the prominence of Brazil, the Gulf of Mexico, etc., and to the same standard as a modern-day map in 2020. The difference between the two maps is extraordinary. In less than a decade, humanity's knowledge of the world grew from an almost Dark Ages mentality to that of our modern world. Their world literally became unrecognizable in less than a decade. And this newfound scientific understanding ushered in a new era of commerce and wealth that has never been seen before. It's amazing when you think about it how quickly the world can radically change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. We've seen plenty of examples in our own lifetimes. In 1995, hardly anyone had even heard of the internet. By 2005, it became so ubiquitous that we couldn't imagine our lives without it. In 2000, hardly anyone had a mobile phone. By 2010, nearly everyone had one. At the start of 2007, no one had ever seen a touchscreen smartphone. Steve Jobs would unveil the first ever iPhone in January of that year. In less than a decade, our entire species has become completely zombified, swiping and scrolling our lives away while we walk, eat and drive, without ever looking up. Just like the world maps in the 1520s, each of these trends represented a radical shift in the way we live, work and engage with one another. We're living through another one right now, a powerful, dangerous social trend that's being driven by anger and ignorance. Think about it. 5 years ago around this time, things still felt pretty normal. There was always political bickering and ideological conflict, but discourse was pretty civil. No one advocated for violence and called someone else a racist for simply having a different opinion. Then all of a sudden, in late 2015, people started becoming completely unglued. At first the madness was isolated. Ultra-liberal universities, pockets of social media. We saw cry-bully students in California and on the East Coast physically blocking certain speakers from setting foot on campus, anyone whose opinions they found offensive. Like most movements, this one started slowly but quickly gathered momentum. Suddenly became acceptable to expect everyone else to conform to your whiny sensitivities. Terms like safe space entered the lexicon, and social justice warriors started demanding that we avoid using certain everyday words and pronouns to ensure that nobody would be offended. At the same time, socialists came out of hiding and quickly became mainstream. Some of the most popular politicians in the world are now card-carrying socialists. Bernie Sanders is now the leading contender of a major party to become President of the United States, and a number of recent polls, CBS, YouGov, show Sanders winning the national election in November. These people despise wealth, they hate profit, they're mistrustful of private property. They believe that many private industries should be owned and controlled by the government. 5 years after it all started, these movements, social, economic, etc., have all merged together and become violent. Thugs now roam the street of major cities, physically assaulting anyone they deem an enemy of their movement. It's ironic that these criminals call themselves anti-fascists or Antifa, given how similar their tactics are to Hitler's brown shirts in the 1920s Germany. At one recent protest in California, a conservative politician was threatened by an Antifa thug who said, "I just want you dead, and you're a racist, I can tell just by looking at you." Protesters meanwhile held up signs like "Can't have capitalism without racism." This is now considered acceptable mainstream thinking, and not just in the land of the free, it's all over the world. This trend is a major force like a runaway freight train, and every day they're more emboldened. So it's picking up speed. One might simply hope that it all goes away, that someday soon people come to their senses and sanity is restored. But as we used to say in the military, hope is not a course of action. And given the broader view of history, it's unlikely that this trend goes gentle into that good night. In fact, it's far more likely to accelerate. And just like other major trends, this one also stands to fundamentally transform the way we live, work, and do business. Think about it. This movement, which grows stronger by the day, wants to seize private property, nationalize entire industries, raise taxes to sky-high levels, bankrupt the treasury with unaffordable entitlements, label all white males as racist, and physically assault intellectual dissenters. It's fair to say that this might have a bit of an impact. Never forget that we're talking about people who are irrational and prone to violence. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to start thinking about a plan B. And quite frankly, I really don't have any idea how to resolve this. Everybody right now seems to be so angry. It is almost impossible to have any kind of reasonable conversation without raising heckles or, the name calling to start, this kind of stuff. What do you do? I am open to any kind of suggestions, but saner heads must prevail here, and I'm hoping that there is enough people pushing back, and who knows, maybe the change is wrought about by the sudden slackening of trade. I think we're going to see some really devastating outcomes from the spread of this virus throughout the world, just from a trade perspective. And I think maybe it may provide the common goal that we need to come together and start cooperating with each other. Who knows? I wish it weren't such a devastating thing to have to happen to create that kind of situation, but maybe that is just what humanity needs to give it a good slap up alongside the head to start working together and trying to really improve the lot of everybody. Okay, well, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. Please share. YouTube is messing around with the algorithms, and since the advent of the situation in Asia, of course, YouTube videos are being demonetized left, right and center. So please share. This is about the only way that my video gets around to other people. Okie dokie, well, you take care, and in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Take care. Bye.